The 87th session of the Texas Legislature began on Tuesday. The crucial lawmaking time only rolls around once every 2 years, but this one will be very different than what we've seen in the past. From a leaner state budget to virtual learning policies to coronavirus restrictions, Texas lawmakers are facing a brand new set of issues this year. Earlier this week, I sat down with Democratic State Senator Royce West of Dallas to hear more on what we can expect this session. Democratic State Senator Royce West of Dallas, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So as you know, the legislative session starts tomorrow on Tuesday. It's upon us. And so I wanted to find out from you, this is going to look and feel very different from other opening days in the past.
Yes, you better believe it. It'll be an abbreviated opening day because of, needless to say, of the COVID-19 virus. And so we've got to make certain we swear our new members in, and then we'll ultimately have a meeting of the Senate caucus to talk about rules for this session.
And so let me ask you, are you satisfied with the protocols that the Senate has put in place, the Lieutenant Governor has put in place for the state Senate?
The Lieutenant Governor, to answer your question, yes, at this point in time. You know, there's always room for improvement. And so the protocols have been a collaboration of getting the consensus of members, both Democrats and Republicans. So yes, I am.
And what are your priorities for this upcoming session?
Let me just give you broad strokes on criminal justice. Let's say the George Floyd bill and maybe the Logan John bill. I'll have those in the Senate. I want to deal with issues concerning expansion of Medicaid. It makes no sense that when we're looking at getting the BRE from the comptroller today, you know, in terms of the amount of money we're going to have to spend, it makes no sense trying to find other revenue sources. And I think expansion of Medicaid will do just that. We will make that case again. The question is whether Republicans will use that as an opportunity to get additional general revenue to spend on other priorities within the state. We will deal with issues concerning redistricting. I'm on the redistricting panel. That's coming up. We'll deal with issues concerning education. We've got to make certain that the commitment that we made last legislative session, that we keep that commitment. And needless to say, there are other areas that I can go into, higher education, making certain we do whatever we need to do to maintain the funding sources for our institutions of higher education, as well as our health institutions within the state. So that's just kind of a broad overview of what I'll be working on.
Well, you certainly mentioned a lot, and as you mentioned as well, that the comptroller is going to be issuing his report to the legislature and the public today. And so I'm just wondering, how concerned are you that this may very well have to be a tight budget where cuts have to be made in addition to trying to make sure that all these other priorities are funded?
Well, I'm very concerned about that, but I also think that we can reduce the number of cuts that we have to make if we look at additional sources of revenue, okay? Again, based on the analysis of the Perryman Group, we can save general revenue, which we use to fund the budget in great part, if we expand Medicaid. We'll pull down additional federal dollars as a result of that and not have to, every legislative session, as you well know, come back with a supplemental appropriation bill in order to fund the shortfall in Medicaid that we didn't project, okay, as an example. We should look at legalizing marijuana. I mean, Oklahoma as an example. We have states around us that are legalizing the use of marijuana and bringing in revenue sources. You know, this Puritan position that we take in the state of Texas concerning the use of marijuana, I understand if you don't want to use it, don't use it. But it could be a source of revenue that we could utilize in order to reduce the number of cuts that we have to make. Gaming, I mean, you know the story. Year after year, we talk about gaming, the gaming revenue that goes to Louisiana and Oklahoma. And you have Texas license plates that are going there. Let the people vote on whether or not they want to have gaming in the state of Texas, and then project what the potential revenue is. So those are three sources. The Puritan attitude that's being taken in the state of Texas is unrealistic. While we look at cutting much needed programs as opposed to trying to find revenue sources, in order to fund those particular programs.
Do you think that there will be a greater chance because of the pandemic and because of this Perriman report that Medicaid will be expanded, that Republicans may now really give it an open ear?
I know that some of the Republicans that I've been talking to will give it an open ear, but here's the deal. If the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker won't give it an open ear, it's not going to happen. Okay.
Have you had any discussions with the lieutenant governor about it?
No, I haven't, not yet, but I mean, it's plenty of time to do that. I want to make sure I have all my numbers lined up and answer any questions that he, or the governor, or the speaker might have concerning the methodology that I'm recommending.
And wanted to ask you, because you also talked about the commitments that were made last session for public education. Since the pandemic, we've seen that school districts obviously had to teach children virtually. And we've seen the problems with that as far as people and students not having access, digital access. And so I'm wondering, is that going to have to be addressed by the legislature this session?
Absolutely. And there is a task force that was appointed by the governor to look at that particular issue. It's going to be great to see exactly where they are. That is a priority in education also. We cannot have our rural communities and our urban communities that are not connected. The fact is, it should be a utility, just like some of the other utilities that's given to each household in the state of Texas. If we're going to get further ahead in education, telemedicine, and those other areas, we should treat that broadband connection as a utility, as opposed to saying, well, if you want it. It should be associated with each household, and frankly, each business.
You mentioned before the George Floyd Act and the Botham-Jean Act, and I'm wondering, talk to me a little bit about what the most important aspects of each of those bills are for you.
Well, I mean, the most important aspect is to make certain that we ban these chokeholds, which I think there's universal acceptance. We've been talking with the combined law enforcement organization. We need to also make certain that we look at holding police officers responsible. If they see something, they need to say something. You know, the code of silence that you have. If you have a partner that you know they're doing something wrong, you should have a duty to make certain that you stop that person from violating someone's rights and report the incident within itself. We need to also look at the issue of liability. And I know that's going to be probably the most thorniest issue that we have, but we need to look at that issue to figure out how to make certain that we hold persons responsible for their conduct. There needs to be there needs to be more transparency in terms of law enforcement, Jack. We've got to make certain we still protect our law enforcement officers. I want to make certain that they leave home in the morning, they're going to go home in the evening. And all of this is rubbish. And let me say this right now, as it relates to people talking about defunding the police, rubbish. I'm not talking about defunding the police. I want to make certain that, as Chief Brown said, as you recall, during the issues that we had here in Dallas back in July, I can't think of the year, but police officers should have a core responsibility. And that core responsibility needs to be set in stone and funded appropriately. And to the extent that we're asking them to chase dogs and things like that, that's not their responsibility. We need to make certain that those agencies responsible for those types of responsibilities, I should say, should be funded appropriately. Mental health. I want to make certain that there's a mental health certification by all law enforcement officers in the state of Texas, because you, as well as I know, that in many instances, they get called out to mental health calls where someone ends up hurt or either dying. And we need to make certain that, similar to what we're doing in Dallas, that there is a fact a person going out that's a mental health officer or expert that tries to diffuse the situation before anyone gets hurt. And so there's a whole lot of different reforms we're going to be looking at. And I'm hoping that we will come up with some consensus in terms of some of the reforms we need in both the Botham-Jean Act as well as the George Floyd Act.
I mean, and you referenced the teams, the mental health teams that the city of Dallas has that go out with the police department, the program that the city has. But on a statewide basis, isn't that going to require funding because you have smaller law enforcement agencies, in rural areas that don't have that, may not have that type of funding. So isn't that going to require funding from the state?
Well, I think yes. I think it requires a partnership with the state, and to the extent that we can reallocate some of the resources that we've already funded for mental health for those particular purposes, then we should do that. And we have instances where you don't have the infrastructure, so to speak. I think that we have got to look at starting to build the infrastructure. We may not be able to get everything done this session, but we should approve the concept this session and figure out how to fund it on a going forward basis.
You also mentioned redistricting, and on top of everything else, as you know, that's always a very politically thorny issue. And so there's a lot facing the legislature right now. What are your biggest concerns as far as redistricting? And do you think that it can all be accomplished during the regular session, or do you think there will need to be a special session on that?
Well, let me say this to our listeners that are listening to this and looking at and listening to this. I'm making $600 a month. You can be assured that I will earn that $600 a month, not only during the regular session, but the special session. There will be a special session. We don't have the census data back from the federal government yet, and the projections are that it won't come back until around March, April, if it comes back then, which means we won't have time to do the redistricting during the regular session, and it means that I will be in Austin during the summertime working on this also to get our job done.
What is your biggest concern with regard to redistricting?
Well, representation. I mean, what happens, Jack, is that we end up staying in court pretty much the whole decade when we do redistricting. And the question is how do we reduce the chances of that happening again during this particular decade? Fair representation, making certain that those 3 congressional seats that we may very well get are developed proportionately, to make certain that Democrats get an opportunity to have a additional congressperson. I think we should be able to get an additional congressperson here in North Central Texas. I think we should be able to get an additional U.S. state Senate seat here in the Metroplex, where a Democrat will have a fair opportunity, a minority Democrat will have a fair opportunity in order to win.
But you're not talking about adding a state Senate district. You're just talking about shifting it around, right?
Shifting around, right.
Okay. And let me ask you.
And let me say that. That's as a result of more and more people moving to urban centers. Now, we got to make certain our rural communities are represented, but we don't need to have these little funny fingers coming into the urban areas in order to get the populations necessary when we have ample opportunity to rearrange a Senate seat where it's competitive with both a rural area and also an urban center.
And I wanted to ask you about a rule change that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is going to be asking state senators about, which would lower the threshold so that it would take 18 senators, which are the number of Republicans now, to start debate on a bill. Where are you on that?
I'm against it, first of all, but I was against the reducing it from 21. But he who has the goal makes the rules. Republicans control the state Senate, and I would think that that particular rule will pass 18 to 13.
So you think it'll just be right on party lines?
It'll be along party lines.
And my last question to you, Senator, and I appreciate your time, and that is, what do you think the overall outlook on the session will be in the sense of bipartisanship and getting things done, and the tone?
Well, you know, I just hope that what we saw at the Capitol, our Capitol, don't happen in the state of Texas. I'm hoping also that the messages that were resonating from the insurrection unamplified here in Texas. I think it will do a disservice to us being able to have a bipartisan effort to get things done. And so I'm going to work feverishly to develop coalitions based on interests and not based on ideology or anything else, in order to make certain that we address the issues that people have voted us in to get done. We've got to get our budget done. We've got to protect our schools. We need to look at making certain that we do redistricting and a whole host of those other issues. We need to come together on. There will be some partisanship, because there always is. But I'm hoping that on 95% of the issues, we can have bipartisanship.
State Senator Royce West, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Stay healthy.